What happens to prisoners sentenced to die? While executions are often associated with the most heinous crimes, the sheer number carried out under George W. Bush's governorship made Texas the execution capital of the U.S. From notorious serial offenders to those whose cases sparked debate over fairness and evidence, Bush presided over prisoner executions more than any other modern governor. Some went to their deaths claiming innocence, others found religion behind bars, and a few expressed no remorse at all. Today, we uncover their stories, their crimes, their final meals, and their last words. Stay tuned for the chilling details. Karla Faye Tucker. State, Texas. Execution. Date, February 3, 1998.
Police say the suspect may be responsible for the murders of at least 6 women whose bodies have been found in or near the Acres Homes area.
Defense attorneys had argued that Yates was legally insane and grossly psychotic when she drowned the children.
Karla Faye Tucker was convicted of the brutal 1983 murders of Jerry Lynn Dean and Deborah Thornton in Houston, Texas. On the night of June 13th, Tucker and her boyfriend, Danny Garrett, broke into Dean's apartment intending to steal motorcycle parts. The break-in quickly escalated into a gruesome attack when Garrett assaulted Dean with a hammer. Tucker then joined in, repeatedly striking Dean with a pickaxe. When Deborah Thornton, who had been sleeping in the apartment, woke up and screamed, Tucker turned the weapon on her as well. Both victims suffered multiple wounds, with the attack described as especially brutal. Tucker later admitted that she experienced an adrenaline-fueled thrill while committing the murders, even laughing about it afterward. Her confessions, along with overwhelming forensic evidence, led to her swift conviction. During her trial, prosecutors highlighted her apparent lack of remorse at the time, though her attorneys argued that drug use played a major role in her actions. In 1984, she was sentenced to death, making her the first woman in Texas to receive the death penalty since the Civil War. However, while on death row, Tucker underwent a dramatic transformation. She became a born-again Christian and became widely known for her deep faith and advocacy for spiritual reform among inmates. Her case gained international attention, with high-profile figures including Pope John Paul II and televangelist Pat Robertson petitioning for clemency, arguing that she was a reformed woman who no longer posed a threat to society. Despite these efforts, Texas Governor George W. Bush denied her clemency request, maintaining that her sentence should be carried out as prescribed by law. On February 3, 1998, Karla Faye Tucker was executed by lethal injection at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. She was 38 years old at the time of her death. Tucker did not request a special meal for her last meal, instead receiving the standard Texas prison meal. Before her execution, she spoke with peace and conviction, saying, "I am going to be face to face with Jesus now. I love all of you very much. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you." She was pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m. CST. Odell Barnes Jr., State, Texas. Execution date, March 1, 2000. Odell Barnes Jr. was convicted for the 1989 murder of Helen Bass, a 42-year-old woman who was brutally beaten, stabbed, and shot in her home during a burglary in Wichita Falls, Texas. Authorities found Bass's body with multiple stab wounds, blunt force trauma to the head, and a fatal gunshot wound. The crime scene showed signs of a violent struggle, and prosecutors argued that Barnes had broken into her home with the intent to steal, but the situation escalated into a gruesome murder. Barnes was arrested 2 days later when he was caught driving Bass's stolen car. Investigators claimed they found blood, fibers, and a weapon linked to the crime in his possession. Additionally, an eyewitness placed him near the victim's home on the night of the murder. Based on this evidence, Barnes was sentenced to death in 1990. In the years leading up to his execution, Barnes's case attracted international attention, with human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and the French government, advocating for a review of his conviction. His defense team argued that the forensic evidence used to convict him was flawed and possibly fabricated. They also pointed out that the blood and semen evidence used in the case may have been planted by investigators, and that key witnesses recanted their testimonies, claiming they had been pressured by authorities. Despite these concerns, Texas courts denied Barnes's appeals, and Governor George W. Bush refused to grant clemency. His execution proceeded as scheduled. Barnes declined to request a special meal and was served the standard prison meal. In a powerful statement before his execution, Barnes condemned the justice system, saying, "Yes, I do. I was framed. I am innocent. They lied. They took the life of an innocent man." He was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. CST on March 1, 2000. Timothy McVeigh, State, Indiana. Execution date, June 11, 2001. Timothy McVeigh, a former U.S. Army veteran, was the mastermind behind the Oklahoma City bombing on April 19, 1995, which remains one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. He detonated a 4,800-pound bomb in a Ryder truck outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people, including 19 children, and injuring over 600 others. The attack was motivated by his deep resentment toward the federal government, particularly in response to the Waco siege and the Ruby Ridge incident. McVeigh was arrested just 90 minutes after the bombing during a routine traffic stop for driving without a license plate. Investigators quickly linked him to the attack, and he was indicted on 11 federal counts, including use of a weapon of mass destruction and murder of federal law enforcement officers. He was convicted in 1997 and sentenced to death. He had 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream for his last meal. McVeigh chose not to speak before his execution. Instead, he left behind a handwritten statement quoting the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. The final lines read, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was pronounced dead at 7:14 a.m. CDT. His execution was the first federal execution in the U.S. since 1963 and was broadcast via closed-circuit television to the families of the victims. Juan Raul Garza, State, Indiana. Execution date, June 19, 2001. Juan Raul Garza was a drug kingpin from Brownsville, Texas, who operated a massive marijuana smuggling ring between Mexico and the U.S. during the late 1980s and early 1990s. He was convicted of orchestrating the drug-related murders of at least 3 men: Thomas Albert Rumbo Jr., Gilberto Matos, and Erasmo de la Fuente, in order to eliminate competition and maintain control over his operation. Garza's crimes came to light as part of a larger federal crackdown on violent drug cartels. He was tried under the Federal Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which allowed the death penalty for drug-related homicides. Despite appeals arguing that he had reformed in prison and that sentencing disparities disproportionately affected minorities, his clemency request was denied by President George W. Bush. Garza had steak, French fries, onion rings, Diet Coke, and 3 slices of bread for his last meal. Before his execution, he expressed remorse for his crimes, apologized to the families of his victims, and urged young people to stay away from crime. He also spoke about the unfairness of the death penalty, particularly its impact on minorities. His final words were, "I'm sorry. I want to say to my family that I love them. To the families of the victims, I regret what happened and hope my death brings them peace." Garza was executed by lethal injection and was pronounced dead at 7:09 a.m. CDT. His execution was the second federal execution in 38 years, following Timothy McVeigh just 8 days earlier. Louis Jones, Jr., State, Indiana. Execution date, March 18, 2003. Louis Jones, Jr., a highly decorated Gulf War veteran, was convicted of the 1995 kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of Tracy Joy McBride in Texas. On February 18, 1995, Jones abducted McBride from Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas. Witnesses later recalled seeing a man matching Jones's description, forcing McBride into a vehicle in the base's laundry facility parking lot. Jones sexually assaulted McBride before beating her to death and leaving her body in a remote area near San Angelo. The remains were discovered a week later. Investigators quickly linked Jones to the crime based on physical evidence, including DNA. When confronted, Jones confessed to the murder but attempted to justify his actions by claiming he had been suffering from Gulf War syndrome, a controversial medical condition allegedly caused by exposure to nerve agents and other toxins during his military service. Despite his distinguished 12-year military career, which included service in Operation Desert Storm, prosecutors argued that his crime was brutal and premeditated, warranting the death penalty. In 1995, Jones was convicted under federal kidnapping and murder charges and sentenced to death in 1996 under the Federal Death Penalty Act of 1994, making his case one of the first federal death sentences under the new law. Jones's attorneys argued that his Gulf War exposure to chemical agents may have contributed to neurological damage that altered his behavior, leading to the violent crime. His legal team also presented evidence of childhood abuse and post-traumatic stress disorder from his military service. However, courts rejected these arguments and his appeals were denied. Jones also filed a clemency petition to President George W. Bush, requesting his sentence be commuted to life in prison without parole due to his military service and mental health conditions. Bush denied the request, allowing the execution to proceed. He had a well-done steak, a baked potato, a salad with ranch dressing, a roll, and a peach drink for his final meal. Before his execution, Jones recited his final prayer. "I commend my spirit into your hands, Lord Jesus Christ." Jones was executed by lethal injection at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on March 18, 2003. He was pronounced dead at 7:08 p.m. Central Standard Time. Ronald A. Gray. State: military death row. Sentencing date: 1988. Ronald A. Gray, a former U.S. Army soldier, was convicted of a series of brutal rapes and murders committed between 1986 and 1987 while he was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. His crimes included the assault and murder of multiple women, including both military personnel and civilians. He was tried in both civilian and military courts, receiving multiple life sentences in civilian court before a military court-martial sentenced him to death in 1988. His case was historically significant, as military executions had not been carried out in decades. In 2008, President George W. Bush approved Gray's execution, making him the first U.S. service member to receive a presidentially authorized military execution since 1957. However, his execution was stayed that same year due to ongoing appeals and legal challenges regarding his competency and the fairness of his trial. Gray remains on military death row at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. As of March 2025, his execution has not been scheduled due to ongoing legal challenges. Lesmond Mitchell. State: federal death row, Arizona. Execution date: August 26, 2020. Lesmond Mitchell was convicted in 2003 for the brutal murders of 63-year-old Alice Slim and her 9-year-old granddaughter, Tiffany Lee, during a carjacking on Navajo Nation land in Arizona in 2002. Mitchell and an accomplice initially planned to steal Slim's vehicle, but escalated the crime by stabbing her 33 times, forcing the young girl to sit beside her dying grandmother. Afterward, they killed Tiffany by dropping large rocks on her head. They later dismembered and buried the victim's remains in a shallow grave. Although the Navajo Nation opposed the death penalty in the case, federal prosecutors pursued capital punishment under the Federal Death Penalty Act. Mitchell was sentenced to death in 2003, becoming the only Native American on federal death row at the time. His execution was delayed for years due to appeals and opposition from Native American leaders. Mitchell declined to request a special last meal and was given the standard prison meal. He remained silent when asked for final statements before his execution. Mitchell was executed by lethal injection at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on August 26, 2020 at approximately 6:29 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dustin Lee Honken. State, Indiana. Sentencing, 2004.
An Iowa meth kingpin convicted of killing 5 people was executed today in Indiana.
Dustin Lee Honken was a convicted drug dealer who orchestrated the brutal murders of 5 people, including 2 children, in 1993. Honken, a methamphetamine manufacturer in Iowa, was under investigation by federal authorities when 2 associates who had agreed to testify against him disappeared. The victims included Greg Nicholson and Terry DeGius, both of whom had connections to Honken's drug operation, along with Lori Duncan and her 2 daughters, 10-year-old Candy and 6-year-old Amber, who were murdered to eliminate witnesses. The case went unsolved for several years until authorities discovered the bodies buried in a remote field. Honken was sentenced to death in 2004 for his role in the killings, with prosecutors emphasizing the cold and calculated nature of the murders. Honken declined to request a special last meal, opting for the standard prison fare. His final words were reportedly a prayer, in which he sought mercy and expressed religious sentiments. He was executed by lethal injection on July 17, 2020, at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. Although Honken was sentenced under George W. Bush's presidency, federal executions had largely been put on hold since 2003 due to legal challenges regarding lethal injection protocols. His execution was part of the Trump administration's resumption of federal executions after a 17-year hiatus. Honken was pronounced dead at 4:36 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. These prisoners faced the ultimate punishment during George W. Bush's presidency, with some spending years on death row before their executions. Their crimes, final meals, and last words offer a haunting glimpse into their final moments. If you found this deep dive intriguing and want to explore more cases like these, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime insights.